So we're here today with Anna Brazel to talk about her debut novel, Fanny Newcomb and the Irish Channel Ripper. And this is set in the Gilded Age in New Orleans. And before we get started, you always hear about the Gilded Age. What actually is the Gilded Age?
It's a small period in American history from about after Reconstruction, so 1876 until the Progressive Era, about 1900. And so it's 24, 25 years, and it's an era when there was a lot of ostentation. And everything was looking pretty, but it was pretty corrupt underneath. So it was kind of a dark era in American history, hence the Progressive Era, about 1900, in which Teddy Roosevelt and a lot of his friends, this simplifies it, that came along and said, let's get better food and let's take care of people better and let's get these laws into effect. So the Gilded Age was pretty interesting, though, because it's not well written about in New Orleans, which is what attracted me to it. New Orleans history is fabulous, and there's a lot of information about before the Civil War and during the Civil War, and really about 1900 with the birth of jazz. That's when New Orleans literature, novels really come into their heyday. But there's not much that's been written about 1889 or Gilded Age New Orleans.
So why don't you tell me a little bit about your heroine, Fanny Newcomb? Is she based off a real person?
She's based off of my research that I did for my master's thesis. I was a graduate student in history at Florida State University, and I fell in love with New Orleans like everybody in the South does. And I've always wanted to be in urban history, so I did my master's thesis on, and this is a long title, but it's social voluntarism in the pre-welfare city, New Orleans, late 19th century. And basically what I did is I went to all of the archives, like at Newcomb College and Tulane University and NOLA, and researched about the women who were doing very interesting social things, and not social things like having parties, but social things like going into the immigrant areas in New Orleans and setting up kindergartens so that children could go to school and women could go to work, or setting up daycare, or actually setting up the women's exchange, which helped impoverished women sell their handmade goods and make money. So I found out that there were a lot of upper class, educated, really smart, really vigorous women in Gilded Age New Orleans who were doing a lot of stuff. And, to me, that was like, well, I could see a heroine in this. I could see Fanny Newcomb coming out of this research.
Wow. I mean, I never knew any of that.
Tell a different story every time,
But the thing is it's like when we're studying, you do it in school, you're going through things so fast and you're so young, you don't really probably even care. But
well, the interesting thing is that when I was studying women's history, we knew that this had happened in the North.
mm-hmm.
We knew that in Chicago there was Jane Addams, and we knew that in New York there were settlement houses, and I think there was one in Pittsburgh or Philadelphia. So, women in the North were doing this, but it wasn't known that Southern women were really doing the same thing. And that's what interested me. It's because we knew it was happening in the North, and I wanted to know if it was happening in the South. Even though I'm not a native Southerner, going to school in Tallahassee and falling in love with New Orleans, I thought there had to be some type of social justice movement in the South. And since New Orleans was the biggest city, that's where it was.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so tell me a little bit about your heroine, because it's like she's not just doing social justice, she's solving mysteries. What brought that in?
She's solving mysteries because at the same time I was researching these women, I was reading mysteries. And I've always loved to read historical mysteries. Might know Victoria Holt. I was probably reading her at the time, and Dorothy L. Sayers. And it was just kind of the perfect combination of, here are these great women in Gilded Age New Orleans who are very active, very smart in solving problems. And hey, here's this other aspect of my life, which is I love murder mystery and detective stories. So they just kind of intersected, and I said, I can see one of these New Orleans women getting involved in some type of crisis, having a friend die and not being satisfied with what the police say, and going on and solving her friend's murder. So from that little idea, that's kind of how I started writing Fanny Newcomb.
And are you planning any sequels for Fanny?
Wow. You know, I actually have like a list of 6 books that I'd like to write, because in addition to Fanny solving mysteries, solving murders in each of the books, you know, she's got friends on the side. She's got a love life. She has kind of maybe 2 love lives. So she's, you know, she's got an arc, an emotional arc of her own love life and her own emotional growth that would also parallel the murders. So I've kind of got 6 of them that I'd like to write, and I was working on one of them, which was called Fanny Newcomb and the French Quarter Laudanum Lover. So you know that somebody gets poisoned. And I was about halfway through, but then my friend died. A friend of mine died, and she had been my editor for Fanny Newcomb. And, you know, the life kind of went out of that story for a while, and I decided I would take up another story that I had almost finished, because it was much more lighthearted. And it was different, so I needed something different to work on at the time. So yes, I still have Fanny Newcomb in my heart and in my computer and in my files over there, and I will write more Fanny stories.
So when we're doing historical fiction, a lot of times we're going to be bringing in people that actually were alive at the time. Are any of your characters real life people?
In the novel, in Fanny Newcomb, there's only one, and that's Eliza Nicholson, who at the time, 1889, was the owner and the editor of the New Orleans Times-Picayune, the newspaper. So she was like the most fabulous editor of the newspaper. And she, again, was one of the women who was like, let's make our world better. And she was also a poet, and she also was a great promoter of I want to say anti-cruelty towards animals. So that was one of her big causes. So she's the only real person I have in my story, except of course, the story is about the mythology of Jack the Ripper. But I try and make clear that there really is an Irish Channel Ripper, Irish Channel being part of the immigrant areas in New Orleans. So I've got Jack the Ripper as the mythology there, but other than Jack, it's really Eliza who's the only real person.
She must have been pretty high powered, and that'd be unusual for a woman to have that kind of a position, wouldn't it, to own a newspaper?
It was, and you know, reading about her, I've read her obituaries, and I've read a couple of short biographies of her, and it kind of sounds like she married into the position. You know, she married a much older man who owned the Picayune, and when he died, she became the big boss. So, you know, that's kind of how things happened back then.
Well, there are always way more strong women than we actually think there are by reading history books, that's for sure.
That's for sure, and that's what I like to write about. And I call them bodacious, which is you know, a combination of bold and audacious. And those are the women that attract me, the women that stand out and do something different. And really, since I only write crime fiction, it's all about the women who will try and find who murdered who or who committed what crime, women who are committed to justice.
So tell me about the book that you're working on right now.
So my work in progress is pretty exciting. It takes place 30 years after Fanny's story, so it takes place in 1919 in San Francisco, which is great because I live in Oakland, so I know a lot about San Francisco, and I've been able to ask a lot of people about San Francisco. Not quite in 1919, but people who know how the city was back then, or know people who knew people. So the research has been really fun for that. And it's of course, it's a murder mystery. It's about a vaudeville chanteuse turned amateur sleuth. So I have a woman, Viola Vermillion, who is a singer, and her lover is murdered in the loge of the Pantages Theater on Market Street in San Francisco. And that starts the whole story of how she wants to find out who murdered her lover. And it's really great. It's been a really fun story because I inherited a whole, I want to say something I'm not supposed to say.
Treasure trove.
What?
Treasure trove.
Yes, a treasure trove. I inherited a whole treasure trove of scrapbooks and music and recording and photographs of a woman who was a vaudeville chanteuse during the late 19 teens and 1920s. So I've been able to really gorge on her photos and her scrapbooks and her music to understand how the time was and how women did their work back then.
So what's the best part about being a historical fiction writer?
So talking to readers and having other people read my book and hearing what they have to say. You know, some people are like, well, you know, Fanny's kind of strident, isn't she? You know, I don't know if I like her. And other people are like, oh, but I like Olive, and I can't tell you the one thing, but I've gotten so many comments about Fanny's love life at the end of the book because people they want to know more.
Yeah.
So it's so fun to have something that's meaningful to me, writing, that's creating a heroine, bringing her forth, the type of woman I really admire in a time period that's really fascinating to me, and then to be able to talk to readers about it is just big fun.
Well, thank you, Anna, for joining me today, and I will look forward to seeing your next installment of Fanny Newcomb.
Thank you. Before that, you will see Viola Vermillion.
Okay.
Okay.
Check her out and find out about her fun life.
Yes.